بسم الله، الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. السادة الحضور، نرحب بكم في ندوة جديدة من الندوات التي تعقدها أكاديمية نسيج عبر الإنترنت. وندوة الليلة تحظى باهتمام العديد من الباحثين والأكاديميين، ويقينا فرق العمل البحثية والمشروعات في المكتبات ومؤسسات التعليم العالي. ذلك أنها تتناول موضوعا حيويا سواء للأفراد أو المؤسسات، وسواء كنا في دول نامية أو دول متقدمة. فكثير من الأفراد والمؤسسات في مجال المكتبات والتعليم العالي في عالمنا العربي تكون لديهم أفكار مبتكرة ومشروعات واعدة وناجعة في التحسين والتطوير في المجال. وقليل من هذا الكثير هو من ينجح في تحسس طريقه نحو الجهات المانحة والمؤسسات التي تقدم الدعم والرعاية لتلك الأفكار والمشروعات. وقلة من هذا القليل هم من ينجحوا في كتابة مخطط أو ملف واف ومتكامل ومقنع للحصول على منحة أو دعم مالي أو رعاية للفكرة أو المشروع الواعد هذا. لذا حرصنا في أكاديمية نسيج في هذه الليلة أن نطرق باب من يمكن أن يفيد متابعينا وأفراد الجمهور الذي يواظب على حضور ندوات الأكاديمية سعيا لتكوين فهم شامل والوقوف على الإرشادات والنصائح الفعالة حول إجراءات التقدم للحصول على المنح وتحقيق النجاح في الفوز بها. عنوان ندوتنا الليلة هو أساسيات إعداد ملف التقدم لمنح المكتبات وطرق كتابة هذا الملف. وسوف يتم تناول موضوعات مثل تحديد مصادر تمويل المنح على المستويين العام والخاص، فهم العناصر الرئيسة التي تتعلق بالمنح المطروحة للمكتبات والعاملين فيها، التقديم في المنح وفقا لعروض طلب التمويل، واتخاذ القرار بشأن العرض على أساس نتائج قرار جهة التمويل، وأخيرا وليس آخرا، وأعتقد هذا هو زبدة ما يمكن أن يقدم، فهم الأخطاء المتكررة والأكثر شيوعا في استيفاء نماذج التقدم لهذه المنح. من الطبيعي أن ندعو للحديث حول هذا الموضوع الخبراء والمتخصصين، ولم نجد أفضل من الخبيرة آن كريغ، كبير مديرين لاتحاد المكتبات الأكاديمية والبحثية بولاية إلينوي، وهي محاضر بمدرسة المكتبات iSchool بجامعة إلينوي، الجامعة رقم 1 في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في برامج وتخصص المكتبات. وهي خبيرة لأكثر من 20 عاما في إجراءات وتحكيم وتوجيه العاملين في مجال المنح وطرح هذه المنح وتقييمها، سواء على مستوى التقديم لها أو إنجاح إجراءات الحصول عليها، حيث أنها تقدمت وحصلت على العديد من المنح التنافسية للمؤسسات والجامعات التي عملت معها، إلى جانب المشاركة في إجراءات توفير المنح في كل من مكتبة إلينوي الحكومية واتحاد المكتبات الأكاديمية والبحثية. Dear Mrs. Anne Craig, it was just a brief introduction to you. I know that it's not matching with all what you have of experience and long journey in the grants and how to prepare yourself to the grant. So I try to summarize this in a way that opens the gate for you to give us, I'm sure it will be a very informative presentation to our audience and to me myself. So I will leave the virtual stage for you, and please try to start it as quick as you can, because I know that there are hundreds of questions will comes from the hundreds of attendees we have right now. Please, Anne, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Abdallah. Thank you so much. It is so wonderful to be here with you all today. I'm so excited to be able to make this presentation, and thank you for the warm welcome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started.
Yep.
Today, our agenda for what we will cover, we'll talk about, first of all, how do I get started writing a grant? What do I even think about? Secondly, we'll talk about where you might be able to find opportunities, grant offerings that you can apply for. We'll also talk about best practices when you're writing? What are the things you should think about? What are the things maybe you should avoid? That kind of thing. We'll touch briefly on outcomes and evaluation. So this is something that a lot of grants ask for, is how are you going to evaluate your project? If we give you this money, how are you going to tell us if it actually achieved what you thought it would? We'll also think about, what is the funder's point of view? What are the people who support this grant, who sponsor this program? What's their point of view, and why is that important? And then we'll talk about, what do you do if your application that you worked so hard on, you put so many hours into it, what do you do if it's not funded? Which happens. It happens a lot. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about common mistakes, missteps, things that people do that sometimes make a big difference that maybe if they had known about, they could have avoided. So that's our agenda for today. And I should say too that I teach this class as an 8-week class. So you are getting in 1 hour what I usually teach over 8 weeks. So this is going to be a high-level overview.
I can see the hidden magic wand in your hand, so you can do it, I can tell.
I can do it, sir. I can do it. Here's my magic wand. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. Who am I? Why am I talking to you about grants? Well, right now, I am the director of a library consortium, and I work for the University of Illinois, which is how I met Dr. Abdallah. Our consortium serves about 130 academic libraries throughout the state of Illinois. So we serve public universities, we serve community colleges, we serve private colleges and universities. So my staff, we have about 25 people. We provide services for these academic libraries throughout the state. Our current grants are, first of all, we have a $2 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education to write open textbooks. These are textbooks that are free of cost to students. Secondly, we have a grant from IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. This is the big federal funder in the United States for library grants. Our grant from IMLS is to help us teach librarians in Illinois how to use assessment to advocate and to define the services that they want to offer. And finally, we have a number of grants from the Illinois Secretary of State, who is also the state librarian. So we are very active grant seekers at CARLI, the consortium I work for. I'm also an instructor at the University of Illinois iSchool. I teach grant writing for libraries, so that's the 8-week course I teach. Before I came to the University of Illinois, I was at the Illinois State Library as the director for 11 years. In total, I was there for 27 years. The State Library in Illinois is the agency that is responsible for awarding federal and state grant funds to libraries in Illinois. So I was able to be on the side of the grant process where we were actually making grants and we were reviewing grants and we were thinking about what grant programs would be good for libraries in Illinois. So I've been both an applicant and also a granting agency. So, all right, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about yourselves. So I'm going to launch 4 polls. The first poll is, if you did apply for a grant. Oop, is that the right one? Nope, that's not the right one. Sorry, hang on.
It's fine. It's fine.
Let
No
me
worries.
start over. 1 second. 1 second. All right, here's the poll I want you to complete.
It's fine.
Have you ever applied for a grant? Okay. So have you ever applied for a grant? Has anyone ever applied for a grant?
Okay, the majority is no, so that's give added value to what we will talk about.
Okay. All right, just give it another second here. All right.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, I'm going to end that one, and I'm going to launch the second poll. If you did apply for a grant, were you successful? In other words, were you awarded the grant? And I've applied for a lot of grants that I did not receive. I mean, you don't get everything you apply for. It happens.
But at least you learn it from it, right?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to launch the next question, okay? Have you ever worked on a grant project? Are you seeing this one on your screen? Let's see.
Some just wrote
Okay,
right
let's
down
see.
there.
Hang on. I think I've got too many polls going. All right. All right. You've never worked on a grant project? Okay.
That's why we launched this webinar.
All right. And then finally, my last question for you is, at which type of library do you work? Academic, public, university? Okay. All right.
Perfect.
All right. Great. Okay. Thank you so much. That tells me a little bit about you. It's great to know. All right. Let's move on. Okay. All right. So how do I get started with a grant? How do I even begin? That's always the question that I get. I want to write a grant, but I don't know where to start. Well, you have to think about what your motivation is. A grant is a very intense project. It's a lot of work in a very short period of time. So what's your motivation? Think about, for example, what do you see as a need in your community? If there's a lot of joblessness, a lot of people are out of work, is that a need? Is that something that perhaps a grant program could address? You know, if there's something that you look around and you see, wow, I wish we had a specific project to do this thing, that's where you need to start. Think about what you feel passionate about. We had a grant at the state library when I was there to serve children who are on the autism spectrum. So children who need extra help. So I felt very passionate about helping these children. You can also think about, what are the things that frustrate you? I wish we had some services for the elderly. We aren't doing anything to help the elderly in this community. I wish we had something we could do for them. Look, they need help walking. They need help getting groceries. They need help doing these things. So I find that frustrating. Maybe that's a good place to start with your grant project. You could also think about, what has made you laugh? What's something that gave you joy? Oh my goodness, there are so many artists in my community. oh, I see all this wonderful art. It gives me so much joy. I would love to have a program at the library for artists, maybe a speaker, maybe somebody who comes in and demonstrates how to do pottery or textiles, anything like that. And also, I think, because I'm getting a little bit old, I think about, okay, there are students going to college today who were born after the year 2000. Yeah. So what do they need? What is it that the people who are coming up through the educational system, what are the things that they need? I know they're not the same things I needed when I was 18 or 19 years old. So, talk to the population that you're trying to serve. Find out what it is that they need. I made a note on this slide of a couple of terms that I will use during this presentation. The first term is NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity. This is a grant announcement. The announcement that an organization puts out about the opportunity that they want to receive applications for. Also, I'll use the term GPO. That's the Grant Program Officer. That's the person who works at the organization where the grants come from. So at the state library in Illinois, for example, there are a number of staff who answer phone calls, answer emails from people who are applying for grants. People who want clarification, who want to talk about their idea. Every organization that offers grants has program officers. These are really good people for you to get to know. They're in the business of helping you. So I'll use those two terms during this presentation, NOFO and GPO. Okay. So how do I start? How do I get going with my great idea that I have for my constituents? How do I make this happen? Well, I always tell people to start with your target audience. Think about who is the audience that I really want to serve. Who are those people? Because your grant is going to be all about them. The grant is not for you. It's not for your library. It's not for your library board. It's for your target audience. It's for the college students. It's for the elderly. It's for the people who are out of work. It's for a particular target audience. So you, as a grant author, need to continually keep that target audience up front in the application. You need to talk about them. You need to describe them. You need to ensure that the application that you've assembled addresses this target audience. This is their grant, okay? All right, this is just a slide of URLs, and I'm sorry, it's kind of ugly, but it's a list of grant sources that I've used here in the US, and many of these have international grant seeking, grant giving arms. So, for example, I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint and I'm going to go to the internet. So give me 1 second to make that switch. Hold on. Okay, for example, here's one of the organizations that is on my list. This is the Kellogg Foundation. It's a private grant giving organization. This is a great place to look for grants that can be international in scope. Here's another one. The Mellon Foundation. The Mellon Foundation certainly gives grants that are international in scope. All right, so let's stop sharing. That's just a couple of examples, but there are lots and lots and lots of grant opportunities out there. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to my PowerPoint. Hang on one sec, everybody. Okay, so this is just a list. It's just a great big list of places to start, places to look. I would recommend to all of you that you look at this Chronicle of Philanthropy. It's an online journal about different grant opportunities. So it's a great place to just look for different kinds of NOFOs that are out there. Professor Abdallah, did you have a question?
Yes, it's not a question. It's just guiding about this one. And I know that the question will be postponed to the end of the presentation, and we are confirming, as we used to do, to write it down in the Q&A
Yes.
box. But here it's I think an urgent clarification about these grants just exclusive for the American researcher or student, or there is other people from the other side of the ocean could be apply or register for it. It's just a quick one.
Okay, so I am going to clarify for you whether these are exclusively available to people in the United States or for people all over the world. The answer is, it depends. You have to look at the organization. You have to look at the call for proposals, the NOFO, who is eligible, who is not eligible to apply. You have to do your research with each of these organizations. I would tell you that the first bullet point here, the federal grant funding sources that I've listed here, those are most likely just for libraries in the United States because they come from the US government. Some of the private resources are where I would start looking if I was in another country. Is that a good answer to your question, Dr. Abdallah?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. It's, I think it's a common question, and this is the right time for it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And please, I really want to know your questions. I want to know what I can help you understand, what I can clarify. So please, I want to know what you think, and I want to know your questions, most definitely. All right, back to the presentation. This is grants.gov. Now, this is the big federal search engine here in the US. So this is not most likely where you're going to find grants for applicants in other countries. But I did want to show you this engine. It is a gathering place, a clearinghouse for all the grants that our federal government, that the US government offers. So, for example, if I type in the word library, it brings up all kinds of library NOFOs that are out there. So we'll look at this a little bit later in the presentation, but this is a good place if you just want to look and see what kinds of opportunities are out there. This is a really good place to look. And I did show you this one from the Kellogg Foundation. Lots of foundations have grant opportunities for people all over the world. Again, private foundations is where I would start if I was not in the US. Also, there are a lot of blogs. I've listed one here. This is mostly for school children grants. So children who are in primary and elementary school, secondary education. So, this is a grant, a blog for grants to school children. So this is a good place to look for ideas. And then our big federal funder here in the US is the Institute of Museum and Library Services. This is a federal agency that reports directly to the President of the United States. So this is the agency here in the United States where many of the grants for projects, library projects are issued. So this is a great place to look for ideas. Again, this is on your list of resources that I gave you. This is a great place to look for ideas. You know, if you just want to find out how somebody has handled a certain issue, I always begin by searching who has had a grant about this topic. Can I call them? Can I email them? Can I look at their application? Can I find out what that grant project was all about? So it's always good to look at grants that have been given and grants that are available. Even if you aren't eligible for them, it's good to know what's going on out there in the grant world. All right, let's talk for a moment about your governing authority. So here I am, I'm writing my grant. I have this great idea. There's this great opportunity. I want to apply for it. It's just amazing. I just know I'm going to get this grant if I apply for it. But stop. Wait a minute. Have you talked to your governing authority? And by governing authority, I mean the people you work for, the people who make decisions for the campus, for the community, maybe a board or a provost or a principal. You know, have you talked to them about this idea? You know, you have to think about if you're going to apply for a grant, the grant will go to your organization. It will be something that your organization works on together. So you want to be sure that your governing authority is right there with you, that they understand why you're doing this, that they agree with you, that they think it's as big a priority and an issue as you do. You want to make them a cheerleader, someone who can say, yes, this is a wonderful idea. You want that in the governing authority. You want them to be engaged. You want them to feel ownership so that when you're talking about this great project and this great grant, they can say, yes, this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. They can talk to the newspaper. They can talk to the radio. They can talk to government officials and tell these people about this wonderful project that you're doing. That is a good thing. And funders love it when there's publicity about their grant project. So I'm a funder. I've given an organization some money to do something special, to do a grant project. And there's an article in the newspaper or in a magazine or a radio show about this project. That's wonderful. That is excellent. So this is why you want to get your governing authority on board. It's also the case that there may be things that you haven't thought about. For example, what if someone in your organization, like your fiscal officer, is retiring at the end of the year? And that's always a key position on your grant team, the fiscal officer. So, you know, maybe you should wait a year to apply because that position will be empty in, you know, a couple of months or whatever. You want to wait until that is not a hole in your organization. You also, when you talk to your governing authority, you want to tell them, here's why I'm doing this. These are the conditions that I'm trying to address. This is the problem, and this is what it looks like now. But wait a minute. Here's what it's going to look like when I'm finished with this grant. The situation will be entirely different. So you want to tell them about now, the before, and you want to tell them about the after. Let's talk for a moment about writing best practices. Okay, this is a place where you really need to spend some time. A lot of grants, and when I was at the state library, I saw a lot of grants that were refused, that were turned back to the applicant organization because they did not follow the instructions. So think about the fact that a grant-giving organization has to use the same criteria to evaluate everyone who applies. So they can't make exceptions. So you must follow the instructions that are in the application very, very carefully. And the way I do this is I print the NOFO and I go through it with a yellow highlighter and I make notes and I read it, 2 or 3 times to make sure that I have really understood the instructions. Now, there's sometimes I don't understand the instructions. So that's when I email or I call my GPO, my grant program officer, and I say, hey, I don't understand what this particular piece of the application means. And this is especially true when you're putting together the budget section. Sometimes the instructions there can get very complex. So you'll want to be sure that you're really putting that application, that budget, the narrative, whatever. You want to be sure that you're putting it together really carefully and you're following those instructions really, really, really carefully to the letter. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. This is just, you got to do it. You cannot, this is not a, grant writing is not a creative writing process. You're not writing a novel. You're not writing something that is, a beautiful memory. You are writing something that follows instructions. So you'll want to be sure you do that. You also want to be sure that you respond in writing to the things that are asked for point by point. If they ask for a statement of need, you're going to say, my statement of need is whatever. If they ask for a project design, my project design is da 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 da. So you want to respond point by point to what the NOFO asks for. And you want to do it in the order, the same order that the NOFO presents it. And we'll look at that in just a moment. The bottom line is you don't want to make the reviewers, people who are reading your application, you don't want to make them hunt, have to find the things in your application that they're scoring you on, because each of those reviewers has a list of things that they score your application about. So if it says, the reviewer's instructions say, did you find the project design compelling? Was it complete? If they can't find the project design in your application, you're not going to get any points for that. So make it easy for them to score your application. I always look at the funder's website for any example applications. Most of the big granting organizations have example applications, really standout projects that they've funded, that they've put on their website for you to look at. Look at them. See how they answered the questions in the NOFO. Now, these are probably, well, definitely, these are from previous grant cycles, but still, they will help you understand how to respond to these questions. And again, if you don't understand what the application is asking, the instructions don't make sense to you, contact the GPO, the Grant Program Officer. That's what they're there for. That's what they do. That's what they're paid for. They are there to help their agency, their organization, make grants, give away money, be successful, have fabulous projects. That's what they're paid for. So talk to them, email them, phone them, ask questions. If you're not sure if your idea fits the NOFO, like, I'm not sure that they're looking for this in applications, call the GPO. Say, hey, I have this idea. I'm not really sure if it's right for this particular NOFO. Can you help me think through this? Tell me a little bit about what the agency is looking for in terms of applications. So that is a really, really good thing to do. Introduce yourself. Talk to them like, you know, they want to give away the money, because they do want to give away the money, and they want to make successful projects. They want to make you successful when you get a grant. Okay? All right, more best practices. Clarity. Clarity before everything else. I think as librarians, we're tempted to use a lot of jargon, a lot of initialisms, acronyms, language that maybe other people wouldn't understand. I'm sure that's true for other professions too, but boy, we have a lot of special language in libraries. Be very careful, because the people reviewing applications, they may not have the same background that you do. They may be very qualified for what they do, but they may not always have the same niche understanding that you do. So explain what you mean. If you're going to use a term, if you're going to use an acronym, explain it. Say, hey, this is what it means. Also, grammar, spelling, punctuation, the appearance of the application, it matters. And it matters a lot to some reviewers. Some reviewers get very, very hung up. They get stuck on what the thing looks like, on whether it was proofread, on what punctuation mistakes were made. They get very, very caught up in little things that really don't say anything about the content. So don't let your application be a victim of poor grammar, poor spelling, poor presentation. Check it. If you have a friend who loves to do proofreading, I mean, we all know those people, right? If you have one of those friends, find them, call them, ask them to look at your finished product. And of course, don't overpromise. Your project is very focused. It has a start date, it has an end date, it has very focused goals, and you must be focused. You must be focused. You aren't doing this thing over here, even though it would be great. You're not doing this thing over here, even though it would be great. You're doing this. So you don't overpromise. You don't talk about this is going to change the world. No, it's going to do this one thing. It's going to make a model for how to address this one problem. So you want to be very careful not to overpromise, or embellish your results promised. I also tell my students to avoid using the first person, not I, not we, not us. You know, a lot of grant applications you read, they'll say, I propose that we receive this grant award to do this project. Well, no, it's not you. It's the library. The library plans to do this grant project. This project will benefit this target audience. So I go through the application and I take out any reference to I, we, our, us. I don't like to see it in applications. I think it doesn't look as professional, as polished as saying the library plans or the library will accomplish. And as I said, find a really good editor to read through your application, not just for grammar and spelling and punctuation, but also does it make sense? Does it hang together? Do the pieces Do the sentences, do they hang together? Do they make sense? Do they fit with each other? Get a proofreader to read it after you're done. You know how it is when you've looked at something so many times, you can't even see the mistakes anymore. You can't even understand what doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, you just looked at it so much. So find someone who hasn't seen it. Okay. I also advise my students to think about the verbs that they use. So rather than saying something that's kind of, you know, not very exciting, like, I hope that a number of these events will be interactive. You say something that's more positive, more assertive, more confident. You're going to say, 5 sessions will require participants to use their new computer skills. So you look for verbs that are more affirming, that are more positive, that are more confident, and you use those in your application. I've included here, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can show you this. Hang on one moment. This is called the Bloom's Taxonomy of Measurable Verbs. And this document, which I've referenced in the PowerPoint, helps you to think about the verbs that you're using. So, you know, from knowledge to comprehension to application to analysis, synthesis, evaluation, so on. The verbs in this column are very much more about critical thinking. You're appraising, you're arguing, you're comparing, you're evaluating, you're interpreting. So I always point my students to this document, which helps them find the right words, that helps them find some powerful words to use in their applications. Why? Why would I do that? Well, for one thing, you will have a limit of pages. You will be confined to 2 pages or 10 pages or 60 pages, whatever. But you'll find that that's not enough room. I don't have enough space. Well, that's too bad. That's all the space you have. So every word has to count. And we all know, as librarians, that, you know, words make a lot of difference. So you want to pick your words carefully. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Back to my PowerPoint. All right. So the bottom line, the moral of my story is write strategically. You have a limited amount of space. Every word has to count. So in your narrative, you want to show how the problem that you have today, this problem that you've described so beautifully, how it's going to change as a result of you getting this grant. Your grant project is the solution to the problem. You want to paint a picture in the minds of the reviewers about the project that you're embarking on. Your narrative, this is the heart of your application. It has to be readable. It has to be something that reviewers say, wow, that was the most compelling narrative. Boy, it really told a great story. It had facts. It had anecdotal information. I'm really interested in this topic, in this project, in these people who are doing this amazing work. So the narrative has to have that level of detail, that level of engagement with the reader. And in that narrative, you want to talk about how the money that you've asked for from this granting organization, how that money will be used and how using this money is going to make your project happen, how it will help you achieve the goals that you've laid out in your project. All right. Many applications nowadays call for outcomes and evaluation. We're giving you this money. How are you going to tell us whether it did any good? How are you going to evaluate your project? Well, I use this little form here, and it really helps me understand. So I start out by filling out my form, okay? So my first question is, what's my target audience? So for my project, my idea, my target audience is, and I just put some examples in here. So my example here is college students. That's my target audience. So here's what should change for my target audience. And this should be some kind of knowledge, skills, attitude, behavior, or status. So what's going to change because of my awesome project is their understanding of how to use these resources that were created by the grant, or their understanding of the subjects that are included in the new resources. So how much are you going to change those things? How much? By what percentage? Well, I'll tell you, 80% of the participating students will show improvement on how to use resources, or 80% of the participating students will show greater understanding. Great, that's wonderful. How are you going to measure it? Well, I'm going to measure it with pre and post tests. You've just done your evaluation plan. You just finished it. You've done the whole thing using this nifty little form. Isn't that wonderful? So that's a great way to think about how you're going to do evaluation. Just use this little form. All right, let's talk for a minute about the funder's point of view. Why, oh, why are we even talking about this, you may be thinking? Well, you have to understand what the funding agency is trying to achieve by even offering you this opportunity for money. What is it that they want to do? What is it that their organization is all about? Why is there a Kellogg Foundation? Why is there a Mellon Foundation? Why is there, what is it that their agency wants to accomplish in the world? What is it that they do? So look at their mission statements on their websites. Figure out what it is that they aspire to do in the world. This is very important and a step you should not skip. It's very, very important to have an understanding of what the agency wants to accomplish in the world. Also, once the NOFO is published, it is not changeable because there are other people out there in the world writing grants based on the NOFO that's published. So, you may not like it. It may have requirements that you think are wrong. Too bad. Once it's out there, it's carved in stone. So, you either qualify for it, you can accomplish the things that they require, or you don't. Okay? So you can't call the organization and say, hey, I don't like this requirement in your NOFO. Don't do that. They've thought about it, believe me. And it's important that you meet the requirements that are in the NOFO. The funder has a reputation as a grant-giving organization, and their reputation, how they're viewed in the grant world, is very important to them. So they always have very consistent, very fair practices. I'll also say to you, the fourth bullet point on here, your record of grant management is really important. If you fail to turn in reports, if you never respond to questions from your GPO once you have the award, they're not going to give you a grant again. So you want to be a really excellent grantee. You want to be a really, really responsive, excellent grantee so that you can apply again in the future to the same organization. I will also say to you that giving grants is not a popularity contest. It's not about you personally, whether the agency likes you, doesn't like you. They're accomplishing a purpose by awarding grants. So it's not about you personally. And they have to think about a lot of different things. They have to think about, okay, we gave 10 grants to the southern part of the country. We better give some grants to the northern part of the country. So maybe your grant doesn't get funded because of things that had nothing to do with the content. They've got a lot of things to think about besides just what's in the application. All right, the reviewers, very important to think about them. They only know what you tell them. They can only understand what's on the written paper. Don't ever assume that they know more than they know. And they have a very wide range of expertise. The reviewers may or may not understand your particular issue, your particular library, your community, your campus. They may never have heard anything about you or the issues you're facing. Write your proposal like you're writing it to someone who knows nothing about anything in your world. Grants are very, very competitive, very competitive. There are millions of dollars in requests for some of the big programs that go unanswered. So, you want to be sure that yours is at the top in terms of understandability, that the reviewers they have fully understood what you've put on the paper. And their comments are given to the funders as consideration. But it's not the only thing the funder looks at. The funder also looks at what the total amount is. They look at geographic distribution, library type distribution. So just remember, it's a very competitive process. So what do you do if it's not funded? And I've had a lot of applications that aren't funded. About half of what I've applied for have not been funded. Don't take it personally. It's not about you. Nobody gets everything they apply for. There's so many variables. Talk to your GPO. Find out, what did the review committee say? Help me understand. Is it worth fixing it, addressing the problems, and resubmitting it next year? And, you have to ask yourself, did the reviewers understand the proposal? Was there something that wasn't clear? You have to ask yourself that, ask the GPO that, and keep writing. Keep writing. You will get grants if you keep writing and keep following that advice. Putting together a grant application package is a lot like following a recipe, okay? Here's our cookbook. You see the cookbook, right? You've got your recipe picked out. Oh my gosh, I figured out what I want to make. I know what the occasion is. I've got my recipe open in my cookbook. So I'm going to assemble all the quality ingredients that I need to make this recipe. And I'm going to read and reread that recipe before I even start. Have you ever started a recipe and you get halfway through it and you realize you didn't do something that you should have done in the beginning? So you're going to read it, you're going to highlight, you're going to reread to make sure you have the total picture. You're going to research what you don't understand in that recipe. So there's some instruction there to do something that you've never done before. Oh, I wonder what that means. You're going to call your mom, you're going to call your friend, you're going to look on the internet, you're going to look at videos, you're going to figure it out because you have to make that recipe work, right? And you're going to ask for help from experts. You're going to find people who know what they're doing, and they can help you if you don't understand. You're going to follow the steps in order. You're going to do it just like it says, in the order it says to do it. And we all know that presentation counts, that what it looks like when you're done, when you're finished, matters. You know, if it's beautifully put together, if it has all the pieces, if it's complete, that looks a lot better than something that's just kind of slapped together. And of course, you want to practice, practice, practice. That's the best way to cook, and it's the best way to write grants. Keep doing it. All right, I think, I'm almost out of time. I just want to show you this NOFO really quickly. This is a NOFO from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I got this off of grants.gov. I like showing this NOFO to my students because I think it's pretty clearly written, okay? So I'm going to show it to you. Hang on a sec. All right, just 1 second here. All right, this is the NOFO. Again, I got it off of grants.gov. It's from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And I want to show you what these instructions look like. So here's the NOFO, and it tells you all the relevant information up front, when proposals are due. And look at that. It says a time that they're due. Believe me, 1 minute after that time, you can't submit it. So got to read the instructions, got to follow the recipe, right? I'm going to go down because we're kind of short on time. I love to talk. Talk. I'm going to go to page 15. So this NOFO, you can see, has 51 pages. So there's a lot to read before you even start. But look at page 15, and am I on page 15 yet? No. Okay, look at page 15 here, where it talks about how to write the narrative, okay? Just showing you this quickly. And it tells you what to include in the narrative. A project justification. So you know what? That's the first thing I'm going to put in my narrative, because I'm going to put the things in my narrative that it tells me to put in my narrative in the order that it tells me to put them in the narrative. So project justification, I'm going to put that in. Then I'm going to talk about project work plan. And then I'm going to talk about the diversity plan. And then I'm going to talk about the project results, so that everything the scoring reviewers need is in order, clearly laid out. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to share again. Hang on, everybody. All right, so we looked at that NOFO. All right, most common mistakes. You're applying for a grant. I'm just going to go through, this is red light, green light. I'm going to go through the column on the left, and it matches the column on the right. So the column on the left is red light. You do not have an idea that fits the NOFO. So be sure that you've read the NOFO, the funder's mission, what they expect. You haven't followed the instructions. Well, read the instructions. Read them many times. Highlight. You're missing the deadline. Don't miss the deadline. I always submit early, and I'm careful about time zones because Washington, D.C. is an hour later than I am in Illinois. Come back. Not following the page limits. Well, you have to read the NOFO carefully. Some of these NOFOs, if they say 2 pages and you turn in 3, they just take that 3rd page and delete it. So you got to watch that. the typeface, the margins, the lines, use the prescribed settings that they tell you to use. Again, if you do something they tell you not to do, they'll just delete your application sometimes. Don't organize it in any way other than what's prescribed. Set up your outline with headings. Don't use complex words and terms. Can your mother understand it? That's always something that I think about. Can my mom understand this? Okay. The budget instructions. Ask your fiscal officers to help you look at the budget instructions. You've exceeded the request amount. Well, you know, if the limit is $100,000 and you've asked for $200,000, they're not even going to look at your project. Don't ask for items that aren't allowed. If you've asked for building materials and you can ask for building materials in this grant, then they're not going to give you the grant. The application package is incomplete. Have somebody at your office, somebody you work with, double check to be sure you have all the pieces that have been asked for. Your presentation is sloppy or unprofessional. Well, find that friend who loves to proofread. And the big mistake, you didn't talk to the GPO. Make an appointment to talk to the GPO before the application is due, okay? I thank you so much for your attention. I really, really do. It's been great. If you have questions, come back. If you have questions, here's my email address. I'd love to hear from you with your questions. So now I will stop sharing and take your questions that you've been writing in chat. So.
Thank you so much. And it was really perfect presentation. And thank you so much for this and energetic and passionate and informative as well presentation. I can see it as a grant in itself. Your presentation is a grant for us. It's not for me, not just for me, for the attendees, and it was full of priceless advice and tips to have the right way to seek for grants and maybe to win it. Who knows? So I can use your words in that you used in the presentation and say that you cooked well your presentation. And I think it was a delicious dish of advice and this one. So thank you so much. And I'm sure that we have many questions for this one. So I will not take too much to talk about. And let's go to the first question, which I call it, this is the $1 million question. What will happen if I won a grant, but for some reason I couldn't finish the project? What are the consequences?
Well, first of all, if you find yourself unable to complete the work as you've promised it, the first thing you must do is speak with the grant program officer. Never, ever be in a position where you surprise the program officer. You don't want to do that. You want to be honest. You want to be forthright. You want to be clear about what the challenges are. We actually had this happen, Dr. Abdallah. We had a grant to do some training, and then the pandemic struck. So, you know, we could not expend the money. There was nothing we could do. So we got on the phone with the funder and we said, you know, I'm not sure what we're going to do. We have this money from you. What should we do? So they worked with us. And this is usually, most of the time, what will happen. The funder will work with you to find an alternate way to fully expend the money. But you want to be honest. You want to let the GPO know that there's a problem just as soon as you know about it. That's really important. Believe me, they've had other grantees that have not been, I mean, that's their business. They know their problems come up.
Thank you. Again, is there a possibility after I won the grant and after 1 or 2 months of hard working, so the funder decided to stop or cancel the grant? What I gonna do on this time? They said at the end SOS. What he has to do.
Well, we've actually had this happen too. When I was at the state library, we had awarded a bunch of grants that we had a budget crisis, and the funding, there was an interruption in the funding. It ultimately, everything worked out and the grantees received their money, but there was a very lengthy delay. What happens? Well, you work very closely with the people in your library, the people in your organization. The people at the GPO should be open with you about whether they think they'll ever be able to deliver the promised funding. If they can't, you just make whatever arrangements you can to withdraw your commitments. In my entire career, I've only heard of this happening one time.
Okay, it's very rare to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Also, I think related to that, do you think that reducing the amount of the grant is it possible to be one of the risks that could face?
I don't think this is anything to worry about. You know, the funder losing their revenue. I don't think if I'm understanding the question correctly, it just doesn't happen. It happened one time in my entire career. So funders have the money before they even put the grants out there usually. So.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have this is question. Okay, there are some universities and institutions and organizations hire what we call it grant hunters who help them to win a grant. How do you see this approach or practice, and what's your reflection on it?
I've never worked with anyone like that. I know that there are contractual employees whom you can hire to write your grant for you. I've never worked with them. I've always written the grants myself. I think that a grant project takes a lot of passion. It takes a lot of commitment. So I imagine that if you can find someone who can share that excitement and that sense of, that you're doing important work, I think that's
Yeah.
fine. But grant projects are very personal. There's something that you care about. So I've never worked with one of those folks, but I know they're out there.
Yeah. So, and I think that you mentioned something very important. It's very personal, or what we call it, full of passion of the organization. So
Yes.
you work it with all of passion and also thoughts and ideas that you have. So make it a professional way. I think it will a little bit reduce the value and also will affect somehow on the acceptance from the funder, because they saw that it's too much professional more than it's passionate. What do you think?
I think that the applications that get funded are those that can really make a difference. And, you only have what you put on paper to convince the people reading your application that it's going to make this transformation, that it's going to do this marvelous thing that you've described. So I think you really have to be able to put that feeling across when you write a grant, whoever's writing the grant, whether it's you or a contractual employee.
Okay, and you mentioned something very important about the power of the word that you use and the way you structure your proposal. So this is, I think, something should be considered and put it in the mind. Okay,
Absolutely.
yeah, and still encouraging the attendees to write down the question. And we have a question here. There are individual and group projects. Please, which one likely to be accepted when submitting the proposal? I think, and maybe he's pointing to the success criteria of the grant proposal. So I think you mentioned it clearly, but how about just give more elaboration on this point in just telegraphic statement?
Sure. If I were you and I was asking that question, I would look very carefully at the NOFO. Does the NOFO encourage, or some of them even require you to have partners, to have different organizations collaborate with you on the grant? So if I were you, I would really read that NOFO very carefully. Are partnerships, collaborations required, encouraged? Do you get extra points? Because remember, this thing is graded, right? So do you get extra points for partners and collaborations? Excuse me. The other thing I'd do is I would look at the grants that have been funded in previous cycles and see if those grants had partners and collaborators, or if they were just single entity applications. That would help me decide which way to go. Do I apply as a single organization, or do I apply as a partner?
Perfect question answer, and I think this will help a lot on this one. I know that you have this call this one, so we will not take too much time from you. We do appreciate you, and so we don't want to make more pressure on you. That
Oh,
call
I'm
is enough.
fine. I'm
Thank you so
fine.
much.
I want to
Okay, so
take your questions.
yeah, sure. We have many here, but let's, because some of them are either repeated for others. The question is about the type of the grants. So, do you think there is a big difference for preparation if the grant is multinational grants, or if it is a national grant, or just coming from a individual organization?
Well, I think the more partners you have, whether they're in the same country or they're all over the world, the more people involved, the more complicated it becomes. And if you do have partners, my advice to you is that you are all crystal clear about who's doing what and what they're being paid and what their responsibilities are if the grant is awarded. I've been involved with projects where there'll be a number of collaborators, but we weren't exactly sure who was doing what. And so, you want to clarify all of that just right at the beginning before the application is even written. Having partners, having collaborators, it does make things more complicated, but it also opens the project up to more people who can be helped. It raises the visibility of your project, and you meet people you never would have met any other way, which is amazing. I mean, what a great thing to meet people from all over the world, from different professions, different nationalities, who you never would have had any other way to meet them. And it broadens your mind, it broadens their minds, it's a good thing, but it takes more work for sure, definitely.
Perfect. Okay, related to that, it's just a question jumping in my mind. It's about changing the scope of the project after the grant already assigned to you. Do you think that this is something easy to raise?
No, it's not. And that's why you have to be really
Articulate.
have to be very articulate. You have to be very careful about what you promise in that application. A funder is funding what you said you were going to do. That's what they've funded. Now, if you want to change that, you're going to have to talk to them and ask them for permission. Most of the time, they will want to have a conversation with you about things you're adding or things you're deleting, but they have funded you to do a specific project instead of funding these other people over here.
Yep.
You know, so you really do need to focus. And I got to tell you, Dr. Abdallah, this is one of the hardest things for me, because once I get into a project, oh my gosh, it would be so great if we did this other thing over here. Or, oh, wow, it would be so wonderful to do this other thing. And it would be so great. But you just have to, you really have to stay focused. And you only have a short amount of time. Some of the some of the grants, you know, they're only for a year or 2 years. That is not a lot of time. It's really, really not.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so there is a question here, and I also have thought about it. It's about the grant, the money itself. Is there advice that you can share it with us about how to distribute it with the team? Is this a perfect way to have this in a way that avoid any futuristic problem, especially if we talk about multinational members, or even that in the same country, but some of them just do more work and expecting just to changing the percentage or the amount of money?
So there's a lot of work that you will have to put into preparing the application budget, okay? And most NOFOs require very detailed budget proposals. Not only do they want the numbers on a spreadsheet, they want you to explain why you're asking for $100,000 for an orbital scanner and why you're hiring 3 people at whatever salary you're hiring them at. I mean, they want you to explain these things. So your questions, Dr. Abdallah, are going to be answered while you're preparing for for actually writing the application. You must discipline yourself to ask the hard questions, to ask your partners, okay, is this achievable? Can you really do this with this amount of money? You know, sometimes I think as librarians, we want to do something for just a little tiny bit of money. You know, oh, I can do that for just this little tiny bit of money. Well, you know, things cost what they cost. You have to be realistic. You have to ask yourself and the people you're working with, what is this really cost? And put it in the application, put it in the grant. You know, you need to ask for the money you need to be successful. And, you know, if you ask for less and you end up with not enough resources, nobody benefits. The funder doesn't get the project they thought they were getting. You feel like you did a bad job. You know, you need to be realistic. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not mine. I'm trying to
or the question.
share
Yes.
this one, but I liked it so much because I think it's very realistic questions. Also, this was another question about how deep the involvement of the funder in the process of the project. Do you think that in a specific time they can jump in and say that, oh, I thought that you take too much time in this stage, this one? Okay, please.
No, they are not. Usually once you have the award, Now remember, you have to do what you said you would do.
Yeah, yes.
And most of the applications now require that you have a timeline. So you really do have to do what you said you'd do when you said you would do it.
Mhm.
So you have to, live up to the terms of the award. They can ask for, and frequently do, ask for audits. They want, and this is nothing for you to worry about, nothing for you to take personally. You just have to keep really good records of expenditures. You have to keep good records of project activities. It is not unusual for granting organizations to ask for financial proof for documents to conduct audits of your project, either programmatic or financial.
Okay.
And most of the big funding organizations will ask for quarterly reports, annual reports, and final reports. So, they're not in there, they're not saying, oh, you didn't do this, or that's not it at all. They just, they are building, they're building a pool of good grantees, who are responsible, and the funders, need to be responsible to the people they report to. This is all about transparency, clarity, and being true to the purpose that they established when they set up the grant program.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know that we still have a question, but I'm really care about just not take too much time because you know that we have the flow. So I would like just to thank you so much, and again to appreciate your time and effort and this
thank
very,
you.
very passionate way to deliver it. You really enthusiastic person. So I think as a way that I need to express my appreciation. A lot of attendees here just asking for another round of webinar to be more detailed about another topic, which is, I think, a factor of the success that you already created in this presentation. So I do appreciate that, and wish you all the best, and call our attendees to communicate us and send their questions so we can share it with you. And for sure, we'll be lucky to have you again in our platform. And Naseej Academy, really proud of having an expert like you. And so as our honor guest, I will leave the last word for you. Please go ahead and share it with us.
Thank you, Dr. Abdallah, and thank you all so much for your gracious words, your kind words. I really appreciate it. It was awesome having some time with you today. I just loved it. This is what I've been doing for my entire career, so I love talking about me.
No. You are talking about the valuable things. If you consider you are the very, very big treasure for us, so please keep talking about your experience, and we learn from.
I want to encourage anyone who has a question or a comment about the lecture today to please write me an email. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you. It would be my pleasure. So I say that with an open heart. I'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much, everybody. It was a joy.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful, and it's an honor to us to have you.
Bye-bye. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you.
شكرا لجميع
Bye.
الحضور، ونلقاكم دائما على خير في انصراف.